She had no idea who she was talking to.
This cabin is closed to staff right now. Please step off.
10 minutes, and I'll be gone before boarding.
Who are you?
They belong to the best pilot I ever flew with.
Don't you dare put your hands on that seat. The voice cut across the empty first-class cabin like a blade, and the man in the cleaner's vest went still, one gloved hand halfway to the armrest. He was tall and quiet and built all wrong for the uniform he wore, a shaved head catching the low cabin light, 2 days of stubble on a jaw you could break a fist on, forearms that had no business pushing a mop, corded, scarred, roped with the kind of muscle a man only earns somewhere loud, gray at the temples, eyes the color of cold water, and about as easy to read. His badge said one word: Calder, Cabin Services. Behind him, in the jet bridge doorway, a girl of 6 held a purple backpack with a pair of tarnished metal wings clipped to the zipper. "Ma'am, I'm finishing the turn," Wes Calder said, even and low. 10 minutes. I'll be gone before boarding." "You'll be gone now." A man moan rose from seat 2A, and the whole cabin seemed to lean toward her. Blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked like a verdict. A charcoal dress cut to remind everyone exactly what power looked like when it walked. She was beautiful, the way a locked vault is beautiful, all that heat sealed behind steel, and every man who ever met her wondering what it would cost to get inside. She had flown this red-eye unannounced because she liked to see how the hub behaved when it thought nobody important was watching. "I don't want airport trash breathing on my cabin while paying passengers board." A flick of 2 fingers at the gate agent. "Take his badge. Off my property. Tonight." Wes looked at her for one long second. He didn't argue. He set down the cloth. He folded it once, the way a man folds something he still respects. He took his daughter's hand, and he walked back up the bridge, a man long used to being weighed by strangers who would need him later and never once guess it. Here is what Adrienne Holt could not have known. The man she had just called trash had once carried a dying airliner out of a black sky with 180 souls screaming behind him. He had done it after prying another man's hands off the controls. And in 90 minutes on this exact flight, hers would be one of the voices screaming. Understand how a man like that ends up on the graveyard shift with a mop. You have to go back 10 years. Back to a flight number burned into the inside of 2 different lives. 811. His name was Wes Calder. He was 41, and he had once been the man they called when the aircraft was actively trying to kill everyone inside it. Navy first, then combat search and rescue, the men who drop into places on fire to carry other men out, then test pilot, then instructor. They gave him a call sign, Lazarus, because twice he had walked jets back from the dead and climbed out breathing. He could feel what an airframe was about to do half a second before it did it, and he could put a grown man on the floor in the time it took that man to decide to become a problem. He had been very, very good at 2 of the worst jobs in the world. Then came 811, and 2 years after 811 came Claire, his wife. A slow diagnosis, and 11 months of watching the strongest person he knew grow small in his arms. Their daughter learned to sleep only with his hand flat against her back. Because the world had already proven, once, that it could take a mother while you weren't looking. Claire made him promise 2 things at the end. Stay on the ground. Stay with the girl. So Wes Calder put his wings in a drawer, and he put his old life in a drawer deeper than that. He turned down the recruiters. He turned down the expert witness money that would have paid for everything. He took the smallest cleaning job at the smallest hub, 40 minutes from his daughter's school, because it meant breakfast at home every single morning. He wasn't hiding out of shame. Understand that. He was hiding because both of the men he used to be, the one who flew like that and the one who fought like that, had cost people everything. And the safest thing he had left to give the world was to stay small and quiet and close to the one small person who still needed him. He did not want to be Lazarus again. He knew exactly what Lazarus cost the people waiting on the ground. Adrienne Holt had a rule she never said out loud. She did not trust pilots. because a pilot had ruined her father and then let a dead man take the blame. She was 19 the night Flight 811 fell out of the sky and, impossibly, came back. 179 survivors, 1 fatality. Captain Raymond Holt, the steadiest pair of hands in the whole fleet, her father. The official report was a small masterpiece of quiet cruelty. It praised, and I quote, the surviving flight crew's response. Then it buried 4 words in a subclause that would eat Adrian alive for a decade. Contributing factor: delayed command decision. They never named the captain. They didn't have to. The industry decided that the old man had frozen, and some young hotshot had saved the day in spite of him. Her father died a hero and was remembered as a hesitation. So Adrian climbed, not for the money, for control. She clawed her way up the very airline that let her father's name rot until she owned the room where those reports get written. Flawless, feared, trusting no line pilot, no union, no anonymous cog in the machine that had ground up the only man she ever loved and filed him under contributing factor. She never knew there had been a surviving first officer, a man who refused every interview, every camera, every check they tried to write him. She never knew his call sign. And so, tonight, when a janitor's glove brushed her armrest, the thing in her that had been furious for 10 straight years simply reached for the nearest small thing beneath her and crushed it, because crushing things was the only thing that had ever made the grief hold still. They were supposed to be off tonight. That was the cruel little joke of it. This was the 1 week a year Wes flew at all. He was taking his daughter to a children's hospital 2 states over, the same specialist Claire had wanted before, paid for with overtime and a standby ticket and a jar of saved coins on the kitchen counter. A gate agent who liked Wes had quietly slipped them 2 open seats up front as a kindness. That was the only reason a 6-year-old named Wren was awake at 11 at night, swinging her feet over a first-class carpet. "Tell me about the wings," she said for the 1000th time, spinning the metal pin on her backpack. "Not tonight, Bertie?" "The captain wings, the ones that aren't yours." Wes crouched down. He steadied the little pin with one scarred finger, old, real, worn soft at the edges, and on the back, if you knew to look, 2 initials and a date. RHH. He never once let her lose them. She thought they were her lucky bird. She had no idea they had belonged to a dead man. "They belonged to the best pilot I ever flew with," he said quietly. "He gave them to me on the worst night of my life, and he asked me to do one thing. I have never once managed to do it right." "What thing?" Wes tapped the wings and stood. "Bring everybody home." He shouldered her bag. "Come on, that's us." He didn't tell her the rest, that he had brought 179 people home that night, and not the one man these wings belonged to, that everybody is a word with no mercy in it. He just walked his daughter down the aisle, past seat 2A without a single glance, to their seats in the back. Flight 466 pushed back at 11:24 into a sky with weather standing on the edges of it. Wes noticed the man in 9C, the way he noticed everything he had trained himself for 10 years not to notice anymore. A passenger who had boarded with no bag, a man who tracked the crew's movements instead of his phone, whose eyes did a slow, professional sweep of the cabin and snagged for exactly half a second on Adrienne Holt in first class. A watcher. Wes filed it and told himself it was nothing. He was a janitor now. Watchers were not his job. He clipped the wings back to his chest. He tucked Wren against the window, and for once in 10 years, he let himself close his eyes. He would spend the rest of his life grateful that he had looked at 9C first. Because the man in 9C was named Marek, and he had not boarded to fly anywhere. 20 minutes into cruise, he stood, opened the overhead bin by the forward galley where he had stowed a device disguised as a shaving kit, and fed a slow electrical fault into the wiring behind the flight deck wall, a fire that would look, to any investigator on Earth, exactly like an accident. He had been paid a great deal of money to make one airline's ruthless new chief executive die in a tragedy that nobody could ever pin on anyone. At 6 minutes past midnight, the cockpit door chimed wrong, a double tone. Then nothing at all. Inside, Captain Dolan said, "That's odd," put a hand to the left side of his own face, and slumped against his harness. The smoke and the sudden stress had triggered a massive stroke at altitude. First Officer Reyes lunged to help him and took a lungful of the electrical smoke now pouring from the panel. Blinded, choking, groping for a fire bottle that the fault had already starved of power. One captain dying, one first officer down, a cabin full of sleeping people, a storm cell building dead ahead in the dark, and a professional in seat 9C quietly checking his watch. The oxygen masks didn't drop. The aircraft was still pressurized. But the truth moved through that cabin the way smoke moves, low and fast and impossible to stop. "Is there a pilot on board?" The purser's voice cracked over the speakers. "Any pilot, please. We need you at the flight deck, now." And then the specific, drowning silence of 180 people realizing, all at the same instant, that the person in charge might no longer exist. Two things happened in the same 3 seconds. Adrienne Holt stood up in first class, 10 years of vault door cracking in public in front of strangers, because she knew in her bones what it sounded like when a plane was about to become the last place her family ever was. And in the back of the aircraft, Wes Calder was already moving, but not toward the cockpit, not yet, toward 9C, because the man with no bag was up and walking forward against the panic, calm as a tide, one hand sliding into his jacket, positioning himself to make absolutely certain that nobody reached that flight deck in time. They met at the forward galley curtain. Marek was fast and good, and had done this exact kind of work for money on 3 continents. He came in low, with a blade meant to open Wes's thigh and drop him bleeding in the aisle. But the janitor wasn't there anymore. Wes slipped the line, he caught the wrist, and he turned 10 years of forced, grinding quiet into one brutal economy of motion. A knee that folded the man in half. An elbow that took the fight straight out of his eyes. The wrist bent back and back until the blade rang off the galley floor. Marek clawed for the crash axe in the bulkhead bracket. Wes got there first. He drove him into the coffee station hard enough to crack the laminate, hooked one forearm across his throat, and held it, cold, patient. A man doing a job he had sworn off. He held it until the saboteur went slack. He zip-tied the man's wrists to the galley rail with a cargo strap. He took the blade, and only then did he turn to the smoking cockpit door. The whole cabin was staring at him. A flight attendant was crying into her hands, and Adrienne Holt stood frozen in the aisle, having just watched the janitor she fired 90 minutes ago put down a knife man like he was folding a napkin. The cockpit door was jammed, warped in its own frame by the heat. Wes set his shoulder to it, then his boot, once, twice. The third kick blew it inward on a solid wall of smoke. He went into the smoke. He hauled 200 pounds of unconscious captain out of the left seat, back into the galley by the collar, laid him flat, and shouted for anyone with medical training. He dragged Reyes clear and got a wet cloth over the man's face. And then Wes Calder did the thing his hands had not done in 10 years and had never once forgotten how to do. He slid into the right seat of a crippled airliner. He killed the smoking electrical bus. He cross-fed the good electrics. He wiped the haze off the glass with his own sleeve. And he pulled on the headset with a calm so total it carried out through the broken door and silenced the entire cabin. Center, Halcyon 466, Captain, incapacitated. First officer down. I have the aircraft, requesting immediate vectors to the nearest suitable runway and clear this frequency. 466, understood. Are you rated? Say qualifications. Wes looked at the storm painting itself across the radar. He looked at the fuel. He looked at the field 40 miles out, and he made every single decision at once, the way he used to in another life, under another name. Center, I've got about 18,000 hours, most of it in things that were on fire. A beat. Ratings are on the ground. Right now, give me the approach for runway 27 left and keep everybody off this frequency but me. Behind him, in the shattered doorway, Adrienne Holt stood staring at the back of a man in a cleaner's vest, flying her aircraft like he had been born strapped into it. And in the back, a small girl, wide awake now, told no one and everyone, with the total certainty only a 6-year-old can carry. That's my daddy. He brings everybody home. Nobody laughed at the janitor now. For 8 minutes, it was flying. Hard, ugly. Hand flown through the shoulders of the storm, Wes talking the trembling first officer through the radios, his own eyes streaming from the smoke. and then it stopped being just flying. Marek came back to life. A professional does not quit because of a cargo strap. He worked a second blade, flat against his ankle, sawed through the strap, and came up the aisle toward the open cockpit with the crash axe he had wanted the first time. Because a dead pilot at the controls, in a storm, finishes his contract for free. The purser screamed a warning. Wes had 1 second and no good options. Hands full of shaking airplane. 30 seconds from the final approach fix. A killer with an axe at his back. So he did the thing the teams had built into his body. He trimmed the aircraft, he locked the controls with his knee, and he turned in the seat just far enough, caught the axe handle on the downswing, used Marek's own weight to slam him into the doorframe, and fought him one-handed in the space of a phone booth while the other hand flew the approach. It was short, and it was savage. A headbutt that starred the man's nose, a thumb driven into a nerve that opened the axe out of his grip, and finally Wes ripping the axe free and driving the flat of it into Marek's temple, dropping him cold across the jump seat. He cinched the killer to the seat frame with the shoulder harness, hauled the controls back level as the airframe bucked, and never once lost the glide slope. The tower's voice changed halfway down the approach. Younger. Awed. 466, Tower. For the log. Say your name. And your call sign. Wes gave it without thinking. The way you give your own name. Calder, Wes Calder, call signs Lazarus. In the aisle, Adrienne Holt made a sound like she'd been struck. Lazarus. She had hunted that name for 10 years. The ghost in her father's file. The surviving first officer who refused every interview. The young hotshot, the entire industry credited with saving 811, while her father rotted under a subclause. The man she had built her whole armored life around hating. And he was flying this plane one-handed with a subdued killer at his feet. He had wiped down her armrest tonight. She had called him airport trash in front of his little girl. You, she breathed at the back of his head, you're Lazarus. You were on 811. You're the one who... Ma'am, sit down and brace. Wes said it level as glass, not turning, breaking out of the clouds with the runway lights swimming up through the rain. We'll talk on the ground. Right now, I'm keeping a promise I made to your father. The cabin did not understand that sentence. Adrienne understood it, and it took her legs out from under her. He put Halcyon 466 down on the wet runway so gently the cabin barely knew they were home. Then he stood on the brakes with both feet, while 180 people screamed and wept and cheered behind him, and Wes Calder sat in the smoke, his hands shaking on a set of controls he had sworn he would never touch again, and he said only into a dead frequency, so quiet nobody else could hear it. That's everybody, Ray. But it was not over. The electrical fire, starved of air at altitude, found what it wanted on the ground and bloomed. The forward galley caught, smoke flooded the cabin. An evacuation turned to chaos at the overwing exits. Captain Dolan, the dying man Wes had already dragged out of the cockpit once, was still on the galley floor beside the growing flames. 2 rows of seats were jammed shut, and a child, 2 seats from Adrienne, was pinned under fallen bins. So Lazarus did the other thing he had sworn off. He went back in 3 times. He carried Dolan out over one shoulder and down the slide. He tore the jammed bins off the trapped child and passed the kid, hand over hand, down the line. And the 3rd time, he came back for Adrienne Holt, pinned, ankle caught, first class filling with smoke. He did not lecture her. He did not gloat. He knelt down in the fire she would happily have left him to lose his job in, freed her ankle with 2 scarred hands, and half-carried the woman who called him trash down the aisle and out into the rain, her face pressed to a wet cloth held by a hand that had put a man to sleep twice that night. On the taxiway, under the strobing lights, soot on both their faces, she asked the only question she had left. What did you mean, the promise, to my father? Wes looked at her, really looked, and finally saw Ray in her, in the line of her jaw, in the fury that was only grief that had never once been allowed to land. 811 lost both hydraulic systems in a storm. Unflyable, he said. Your father flew it with his bare hands for 9 minutes just to give me the picture, and when he knew his own injuries were too bad to finish it, he ordered me to take the aircraft. That delayed command decision in the report. Those were the 11 seconds Ray spent making sure I had control before he let go. Those 11 seconds are the reason 179 people walked away, me included. Adrian was crying now, 10 years blown wide open on a wet taxiway. He was bleeding out in the left seat, and the last thing he did in this world was press these into my hand. Wes pulled the worn wings from his chest, RHH on the back, and he said, "Bring everybody home, Lazarus, everybody. I brought everybody home but him." His voice cracked once. The airline told me a hero's name and a hero's pension would reach his family cleaner, with no ugly public fight over the cause. So I took the ghost name, and I disappeared. I thought I was protecting you. I did not know the price of it was you growing up believing your father hesitated. Your father never hesitated a single day in his life. He closed her fingers over the wings, exactly the way Ray once closed them over his. Adrienne Holt stood in the rain, holding her father's wings, and did the most powerful thing she had done in a decade of ruthless, gleaming power. She stopped needing someone to blame. She turned to her own executives and lawyers, already speeding onto the tarmac, the entire machine she commanded, and her voice came back to her. But different now. Steel, with something human finally alive inside it. Pull 811, the real recorder, the real report, everything legal buried, tomorrow, all of it. A breath. The complaint I filed against Mr. Calder tonight, the termination, destroy it, then draft him a personal apology from this office, and I will sign it myself. And that man in flex cuffs on the jump seat, he boarded to murder a plane full of people to get to me. He gets the F by, not a story. Miss Holt, reopening 811, the liability. My father flew a dead airplane with his hands for 9 minutes so that strangers could see their children again, she said, and the whole tarmac went silent. He has been called a hesitation for 10 years to save this company a lawsuit. We are done being that company, tonight. Then she turned to Wes, soot black, spent, a cleaner's badge still hanging crooked over the bare spot on his chest where the wings used to ride. I called you airport trash. I fired you in front of your little girl, and you fought a killer and flew my plane and carried me out of the fire anyway. You were protecting your dad, Wes said gently. Took me years to learn that grief just wears different uniforms. Yours looked like a corner office. Mine looks like a mop cart. Same funeral, though. And Adrienne Holt, the Ice Queen, a woman who did not cry where anyone living could see her, let out one wet, cracked, astonished laugh. The sound of a weight she had carried so long she'd forgotten it wasn't part of her own body, finally hitting the ground. Wren was at the bottom of the evacuation slide, wrapped in a fireman's coat, absolutely calm, because her daddy said he would bring everybody home, and her daddy does not lie. You brought everybody home, she informed him. Everybody, Bertie, Wes said into her hair, and for the first time in 10 years, the word had mercy in it. So here is the lesson, and it deserves to be said plainly, without any decoration at all. We are taught that power is what keeps us safe. The title, the office, the authority to fire the small people beneath us. Adrienne Holt had every ounce of it, and it did not put down the killer. It did not fly the airplane. It did not carry her out of the fire. What did all three was a man everyone had decided was nothing. A man with a mop who had once been strong in the two ways this world respects most, and who walked away from both of them to make breakfast for a 6-year-old. The strongest person in any room is almost never the loudest one. Sometimes it is the one who walked into the fire once, at a cost you cannot imagine, and then chose to disappear rather than be thanked for it. And the laziest cruelty we practice every single day is glancing at the person cleaning up after us and deciding they have nothing to offer. Right up until the one night they are the only person on earth who does. Adrienne spent 10 years mistaking her grief for hatred. It took a burning cabin and a widower with a mop to finally let it land. The reopened report cleared Captain Raymond Holt within the year. They renamed the hub's operations wing after him, Holt Field Operations. And at the dedication, it was a night shift cleaner in a borrowed suit who cut the ribbon, because Adrienne insisted, and it was the only honor Wes would agree to accept. He didn't take the chief pilot job she offered him. He took a check airman post with day hours and one hard line written into the contract. Home for breakfast, every morning, no exceptions. He had learned exactly what heroes cost the people waiting on the ground, and he was done making his daughter wait for anything. But on a Sunday in spring, at a small airfield where the moon was already up in the daytime sky, Adrian Holt stood beside a widower and watched his daughter run across the grass. Not in front of him, not behind him, beside him, and for a long while neither of them said anything at all. "You still carry them?" she finally asked. "His wings." Wes smiled and nodded across the field to where Wren ran with the tarnished captain's wings clipped to her purple backpack, catching the sun. "She carries them now. Figure a thing that survives a crash ought to spend the rest of its life flying, not sitting in somebody's pocket feeling guilty." "My father would have liked you," Adrian said, and her voice caught. "He'd have liked that you never called it in, that you just brought everybody home, went quiet, and let us hate you rather than let us hurt." "Watch me, Daddy," Wren shrieked, arms out, banking through the grass. "I'm flying! I'm bringing everybody home!" "Wings level, birdie," Wes called back, laughing. "Bring them home!" And Adrienne Holt, who had buried a hero and spent 10 years mistaking her grief for hatred, stood beside the quiet man in the ordinary sun, holding her father's wings, and let herself, for the first time in a decade, simply be somewhere safe that someone else had carried her to. If you believe the quietest person in the room is usually the one who has survived the most, that real strength walks into the fire and then asks for none of the credit, type "Bring everybody home" in the comments. If Ray's last order to Lazarus, "Bring everybody home," landed somewhere in your chest, hit that like so more people hear it, and subscribe. Because the next story is about a small-town diner cook, everyone treated like furniture, until the night the most dangerous man in the country walked in, went pale, and bring everybody home.